Today we're going to review where we left off, and we're going to look at our math word wall to refresh our memories on what these words mean and how we're going to be using them today. So the first thing I have over here is this sign, which means percent. Does anybody know what percent means? What comes to your mind when you see the word percent?
30 over 100.
30 over 100, that comes to your mind. And how does that relate to being a percent?
Like if something was 30% off of original price, like in a store.
Okay, so 30 over 100 would be 30%. You're comparing a number to 100. Good. We'll need to know that today when we get to some word problems that talk about percents. Great. What about this word scale? If I say I have a drawing that's to scale, does anybody have a picture in their mind or any ideas what that means? Yes?
Something smaller than the original size.
Something smaller than the original size. I like that. Do you have an example, anybody? Yes?
Like in blueprint of a house is smaller than the actual house.
Perfect. If the architect's drawing your house, he's not really going to take a piece of paper that's 50 feet long. He's going to put it to scale. Perfect. What about the word proportion? What comes to mind when you think of a proportion?
Fractions.
Fractions. I like that. Fractions. That's a good way to think about proportions. You may say, this fraction is in proportion to this fraction. Another thing you may do is look at shapes and say that this rectangle is in proportion. It's similar to this rectangle. So that's a really good word, proportion. The next word up there is equation. Equation. That's a math term. Does anybody have any ideas what that's all about?
A bunch of numbers with different signs in the statement.
Okay, can you say that louder?
A bunch of numbers with different signs in the statement.
A bunch of numbers with different signs.
Math signs.
Math signs. Okay? Now here's a bunch of numbers with math signs. 2n plus 3 minus 4. Is that an equation? There's something lacking. An equation needs something very specific. What did you say?
Equal sign.
It needs an equal sign. When you see equation, put into your mind equal. One side's going to be equal to the other. That's what makes an equation. Good job. So if I was to add on to this and say that all equals 16, then that would be an equation. Super. Equivalent. If I say something is equivalent, what comes to your mind with that?
Equal to?
Equal to. It's a math term. And many times on a standardized test or a word problem, it will say this is equivalent. It won't say it's equal. It'll say it's equivalent. So that puts a thought in your mind. I know what equivalent means. It means equal. And then you can set them up to be equal to each other. Really good job. What about this word over here on our math word? Theorem. We've been talking about theorems. Last time you were in here, we were working our way through a very popular theorem. What was that theorem?
Pythagorean.
What do you have back there?
Pythagorean theorem.
The Pythagorean theorem. Do you remember what that theorem is? Do you remember? If I say the Pythagorean theorem, what do you have?
A squared plus B squared equals C squared.
Okay, good. So a theorem it's like a proof. Some scientist or mathematician proved that when you take a right triangle and you square this side and square that side, it will equal the square of this side. So that's what a theorem is. And Pythagorean theorem is very, very popular in mathematics. Okay, so those are some of the words that you're going to come across today, and I'm glad that you remember what they are. Some new words that we're going to talk about today relate to reading and how we're going to apply the reading strategies to solve the math problems. So the first word we're going to talk about is chunking. Now back when you were learning to read, first, second, even third grade, and your vocabulary was getting bigger and bigger, you would be seeing some new words. And you were taught to chunk those words. Do you remember things like that, where your teachers were saying chunk it and then put it together? That's exactly what we're going to be doing today, but we're going to be looking at sentences. We're going to be looking at sentences and chunking that sentence, going to the next sentence and chunking. So that's a strategy that we're going to be learning today. Another strategy is skimming. Sometimes when you have a word problem, you just want to skim over it to get the gist of it. You know what I mean by when I say the gist? We're just going to get a feel for what are they asking? What's that picture of? So we're going to skim through some problems. And then this is something we're really going to touch on, highlighting. There's different ways of highlighting the important things that you need to pick out of the math problem. Today we're going to be highlighting by underlining, circling, boxing things in, and just finding a way to make those words and those numbers that are key stand out in the problem.